all of those common FUDs are now gone. So we no longer have the environmental things. Like I really rarely hear it anymore that Bitcoin is bad for the environment, like really, really rarely. We don't have the gold bugs, like a lot of gold bugs like have Bitcoin now also or completely switched. Real estate people coming to Bitcoin. I mean, Grant Cardone, like is one of the recent examples. Like it seems like all of the buckets of TradFi are now recognizing Bitcoin as legit. And now we started infighting about like op return and all, like, because we have that fighting mentality still in there. And now we're like, oh yeah, like, let's find something else to fight on, which was a funny observation for me at least.
Yeah, and I will say, look, people have been fighting internally about lots of things, for a while, right? Now, of course, there was block size wars, but even just kind of there would be kind of low level skirmishing going on all the time, right? Like the coin join implementations, right? Samurai versus Wasabi, and then kind of join market off to the side. There'd be hardware wallets fighting each other. There would be, all kinds of different arguments in Bitcoin land. Although now, yes, there's a lot of let's say the online Bitcoin, echo chamber. Yes, there's a lot of argument about knots versus core. But the funny thing is, if you look at, like, I think Alex Thorne tweeted this or posted this recently saying he works with certain institutional, partners and customers, and many of them were either pro core or not really, caring about this debate, or either not knowing or not caring about this debate. So I think there are times where, as a online echo chamber, people sort of spiral off into their own little purity spirals, and they're kind of talking about things that they think are so relevant, or they think they are the most relevant faction within Bitcoin. But actually, there's like a lot of the big money and other players who don't really care about that, because it's maybe not that interesting to them. That's, so be it. But I think there are times where, yeah, like people sort of lose perspective because they think everyone around them has the same view. So other people outside their little circles also have the same view, but it's just not accurate.
I was just in Amsterdam. I actually just came back 2 days ago from Bitcoin Amsterdam, and I realized afterwards that nobody talked about it.
Yeah.
I had so many conversations. It's all like, we never talk about the price. Like it's like, I love being on Bitcoin conferences because it gets so great conversations, and it's rarely about the price, even when the price, as in those conference, went down. But the block size war was not even close to be a small discussion. In Bulgaria, like a month ago in October, it was a discussion on and off stage also. It's like also sometimes there's a difference between on and off stage. But I don't know, it seems like the peak of the discussion seems a little bit over, but maybe I'm wrong. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, I would say what you'll find is there'll be kind of little moments where it goes crazy, and then it kind of drops again, and then it kind of simmers for a little while, and then it can kind of flare up again. Like, I would say it flared up earlier in the year, and then it kind of drops down again. And then in the last, let's say, month or two, it's really going hard again, at least in the online echo chamber, not necessarily in that. If you think about the onion, that kind of inside layer of the Bitcoin kind of echo chamber is going hard fighting about this, but like one or two layers out on the onion, they're either not caring or just pro core in their mind.
Is there potential soft fork that you could imagine that something like that happens?
So right now, it seems like yes. I don't know if they're going to be talked down from the ledge per se. I know they have switched the proposal a little bit. So, I mean, it's difficult to talk about in some ways because there's different camps and different groups. So the way I'm seeing it is you've got the knots camp, right? That's, but even inside the knots camp, there's, people don't all have the same view. And then there are people who run knots, but they're not necessarily in favor of RDTS, right? Which is the reduced data temporary soft fork. Which I think was incorrectly being called BIP 444, but that was kind of like the meme name for it or whatever. But anyway, RDTS and knots. And then you've got like core, who are somewhat in the middle. And then over on the other side, you've got like Libra Relay side, who are like more liberal than even core is. And then you've got, let's say, the spammers, like the or I call it retardinals as the catch-all term for ordinals, inscriptions, BRC20, and other spammy meta protocols. Stamps is another one. So you've got like the spammers, like Casey Rodama and all the people who are doing like ordinal, retardinal, inscription stuff. And you've got these different camps of thought. And so when RDTS first came out, it was like really crazy. Like it had this reactive soft fork idea and then a proactive soft fork idea as well. And like just all the all this language that was interpreted to be kind of having like a legal threat element to it, or I don't know, sort of, yeah. So yeah, and now, and that was initially going to be done as, I believe it was a flag day for like early February, but now that has shifted back. So I think last I heard, I think it's going to be like a MASF style, so like a minor signaling, and then into a UASF. I still believe, look, as things currently stand, it looks like to me like there's insufficient support. It looks like this idea is highly contentious. A lot of people are against it for various reasons. One is that it cuts down on genuine monetary scripting capabilities, things like op if inside of TapScript, which also has impacts on miniscript, which is not a shitcoining and spamming thing. It relates to, it can relate to us doing inheritance or redundancy and security protocols for self custody. So that's one reason. I think the other reason is just that we can't stop arbitrary data. So I think it's going to end up just a lot of work for not even stopping the spam. So I just think we need a better approach, and that is not necessarily like cutting down opcodes. It may mean more like, hey, we actually need to do better with driving monetary demand for on-chain transactions to price out the spam. And just, I think to some extent, again, this may be unpopular in the echo chamber, but I think sometimes in life you have to bite the bullet, right? Because the other ways that you try to fight it back will end up having a worse outcome for us, right? So I'm not in favor of spam. And again, for the 1,000th time, I get accused of being, having interest in spamming or shitcoining companies. I receive no sponsorship from any shitcoining or spamming companies. I have no investment in them. I have no financial interest in spamming or shitcoining. My interest is as a Bitcoiner, but I often get accused of that. So I'll just, again, say it for the 1,000th time. And I think people are just kind of getting too angry and burnt up about this thing that's really more like a nuisance. And I think it will go away for the most part, or it won't stop genuine monetary adoption, is my view. Now, yeah, they would say, they make different arguments about, okay, hard drive space and internet connectivity, and what about the third world? And they'll make various arguments about that, or they'll say, okay, it's decreasing the quality of money, etc. Now, look, I've heard many of these arguments. I can't respond to all of them in one quick go, but I think the gist of it is we need to just focus on monetary adoption. Don't worry as much about this content spam. I think it is at this point, it's where there's not a lot that we can do to stop it in a principled way that doesn't hurt us in something else, right? In terms of decentralization, in terms of monetary scripting capabilities for genuine money. I don't mean for shitcoining. And I just think we just have to sort of bite the bullet there and accept certain risks. I also think people are being misled. I think there's a lot of people being misled to think that it's like some big new risk now with V30 somehow, when for the most part, I think a lot of these risks were pre-existing, or they are not the fault of core, right? So as an example, with Libra Relay, which is a more permissive form of it's a Bitcoin node software that is even more liberal than core is. And to an extent, a small number of these people running Libra Relay can really change what's possible on the network per se. And so I think there's just a fundamental asymmetry, right? There's this tolerant minority idea that whether we like it or not, it's there. And so I think sometimes we just have to accept sometimes harsh sounding truths instead of, I think what I'm seeing a lot in the NOT and or RDTS camp is what I would say is wishful thinking. There's a lot of this kind of wishful thinking of, hey, what if Libra Relay just didn't exist? Or what if the spammers just didn't do this? Well, I think this is not correctly modeling what spammers will do, right? So I'll give you another example. A spammer doesn't necessarily care about the defaults in your software, right? Like a lot of this argument has been about V30, the op return limit. Remember, this is a default change. So people are arguing about what is the default setting. You can just go in and change it manually. And there were examples where spammers have done this, right? So I think people are getting too angry about what is effectively a default. It's something that was already a changed behavior in the network anyway. So I think people are maybe unfairly blaming Core. But I will say this. I will say Core have not been perfect on this either. I think some of their communications has been poor. Some of their messaging has also been poor, a little bit on like when maybe people try to make these arguments of like, what even is spam anyway? And to be fair, that might be more, not necessarily Core devs themselves, but more like core supporters. I've seen some of them say this kind of argument. Or I'll give you another example. I disagreed a bit with Greg Maxwell's argument around distributed authoritarianism. Like, I thought that was a bit of a clumsy framing. Of course, very high respect for Greg Maxwell in general. I like his arguments in general, but I think that distributed authoritarian framing was maybe a bit awkward or a bit clumsy. I think a better way to frame that would be more like, if it's fine for you to run whatever filters you want on your node, but to try to control what other people do on their node, that's the quote unquote authoritarian part in his view. I think it's just a bit of a clumsy wording though. But I think that's probably the more Steelman point that he was trying to make, which is that, look, if I like vanilla ice cream and you like chocolate ice cream, we can both eat our separate ice creams. But in the case of the filter camp, it's sort of like they sort of they believe that no, it's like you need to eat vanilla ice cream as well. They can't just I eat vanilla, you eat chocolate. It's not like that, right? Now they would argue no, that's because you're defending the monetary, aspect or nature of the network instead of turning it into a shitcoin and spam network or whatever. I just think there's different arguments there on like how much is actually possible, right? Because in theory, I mean, sure, if I could just press a button and have only monetary data on the Bitcoin network, yeah, I would press that button right now. But unfortunately, no such button exists. And I don't think, idealistically chasing that goal is going to help us overall when there are these other real world things to contend with. Things like, okay, what does it mean for block propagation? What does it mean for what does it mean for monetary scripting capabilities? What does it mean for these other elements of Bitcoin? What does it mean for the censorship resistance of Bitcoin?
It's so interesting. Because it's only on Twitter and it's only sometimes when I make those posts, because I always say run node, like run a node, not. It's sometimes hard to distinguish just saying it out loud, but do run a node. And I don't even care which one, but I care that you study them and make your own assessment of what you want to run. And I say that because I don't want a bunch of people running core or a bunch of people running nodes just because I say so. I rather have a bunch of people operating a node and actually knowing what they are doing. Because I do think if you are just a voice in Bitcoin that just does what some influencer says, you don't really have a voice or a vote in the network. And so I always argue for having people in the network that actually think what they want from their node. And that kind of stance got me attacked a lot because people say like, oh, like you're just afraid to make a stance. And I think in the past, I've made many different stands that kind of prove that wrong. But anyways, I really think it's very important that we have a lot more nodes running, and especially nodes that are operated by people that actually think and are economically nodes and use nodes that are actually connected to wallets and actually do something. Now, every node is great. Like every one that is like having more nodes in general, I think is positive. But I would rather have more nodes that actually do something with it and are actually an active participant of the network. And this is a hard stance because it's like, oh, like you're just defending. Like, no, I just want you to run a node and think for yourself which integration. And if you do that, I'm happy. And also, if we all have critical thinking people that run nodes, then the best integration ultimately will win, whichever you think this is. But if you're on the right side and we all think critical about like what is the best integration, the best integration ultimately will win. Or maybe it's fair to have 2 or 3 integrations running side by side and not one has to have 100%. Maybe we can have 40, 20% with like different integrations. I don't know. But I just want to have more educated people running a node and not just like, oh, I run nodes because he said it to me, or I run core because he told me to. I'm like, no, like have a reason why you run it.
Yeah, and even on the whole different implementations thing, like, of course, over the history of Bitcoin, it has kind of waxed and waned over time, right? Especially during the block size wars, there were people running like Bitcoin Unlimited and Bitcoin XT and whatever, these other ones, of course. But even on this point around different implementations, what's happening there is some of the guys in core are trying to work on this project. I did an episode recently with this guy called the Charlatan, a Bitcoin core developer, and he's working on this project. It's known as libitcoin kernel, but it doesn't have to do with libitcoin, which is a separate implementation. I think people are trying to call it Bitcoin core kernel project, and the idea is you could have this way of like calling out to this component inside of Bitcoin Core to tell you, is this valid, yes or no? And other parts in the ecosystem can do that to still check that they are consensus valid. And so this would actually allow people to run different or to create different implementations in the future that are still consensus compatible. Because the reality of it is, the practical, technical reality is it's very, very difficult, some even argue impossible, to make competing consensus compatible implementations. And maybe that's also why for so long Bitcoin Core has just had this near monopoly, not full monopoly. But as I said, it waxes and wanes a bit, and there are other implementations out there. I know, for example, BTCD is another one that's like totally different, and they are providing different kind of features. And I think, for example, UTXO is an interesting project that's being kind of built into BTCD, or like kind of as a fork off of BTCD. And then that is a really interesting idea too, because I'll give you a quick example. In the future, they could have special forms of this using UTXO and UTXO based models where quote unquote grandma doesn't have to run like go buy an Umbrel or a Start9 or a whatever Ministry of Nodes node box or whatever node box. They could just have like a phone app that checks UTXO proofs. And so then they would be like a validating client, but with very, very low download. So that's kind of in the future. That's where some of this stuff could go, right? If you have UTXO, or if you have other techniques that some of the people are talking about now, one is called Swift Sync. So it's like this idea of parallelizing some of the validation, I think, to make the Bitcoin node IBD, initial block download, faster. So these are some of the ideas that being thrown around that can help people to be a validating person in Bitcoin without even like, now, yes, there are some trade-offs or some elements there, like UTXO or Floresta, as an example, relies on there being some UTXO bridge nodes. But to be clear, you're not trusting. It's like using, like cryptographic proofs to know that, yes, you really do have coins, right? You're not just like, it's not trust me, bro. It's actually, you have been cryptographic. You're getting certain cryptographic assurances that you have coins or UTXOs. And so the proverbial grandmas of the world can just use an app without really thinking too hard about it. Whereas, let's say, power users and people who are really into it, of course, we can run our node and do everything the full proper way. So these are some of the things around that. Of course, don't forget, hard drive and internet costs and compute costs are coming down over time, right? Like that's another factor, right? The block size only grows in a linear way, right? Maximum 4 megs per 10 minutes on average, but actually it's less than that. It's more like 2 point something megs per minute. In practice, hard drive and SSD cost is coming down. Internet connectivity is improving all around the world. So I think it's a very nuanced topic, and it's difficult to quickly explain some of these different aspects of it.
Is it overall a positive sign for the strength of the network that we have those debates and that there are strong opinions on a topic that is not as fundamental as, like, I don't know, lifting up the block size limit as we had in 2017?
Well, I think there is an element of, yes, it's good that people are learning about these aspects of it. I think what we've seen is people are kind of like really arguing with very strong opinions, and they're kind of doing a Dunning-Kruger, right? Like you ask a few questions to them, and they don't kind of have an answer to those things, and it's clear that they've just kind of taken what some influencer told them without sort of really reading and trying to understand that. And so that's something that I've noticed, that we're seeing some of the people who are a bit newer into Bitcoin. Some of them, now, to be clear, there are some very highly technical, knowledgeable, OG, long-time Bitcoiners who are in this kind of knots and RDTS sort of camp. I'm not saying all of them are like that, but I'm saying a lot of people who are sort of in this kind of seeing it as like I need to virtue signal for my team kind of thing, as opposed to like really what is the truth of the matter. And I think some of that is because it gets emotionally charged, like some of the arguments that have been brought up can be very emotionally charging, as opposed to like people rationally discussing, well, what is the risk? Is it a new incremental risk, or is that a risk that already existed, right? Like I think these are some of the things that people have to sort of step back and really assess. But yes, people have had to learn a lot about different aspects of how Bitcoin nodes work. So in that part, I guess the silver lining is, yeah, there are people who've had to learn more about Bitcoin. So that's good. But I think some of that could arguably be counterproductive in that it's kind of cutting away from some of the other things that we could be talking about, or maybe it's kind of sucking up attention and energy that really, maybe that's not the best thing. Like maybe we would be better off, trying to get more merchant adoption, or trying to teach more people about, self-custody or some of these other things. Or some people would even talk about, oh, is that distracting from actual bug fixes in Bitcoin? I'll give another example, the consensus cleanup. That's a soft fork proposal to fix some long-standing, well-known bugs. It's been proposed, I think, 6 years ago by Matt Corallo. That's an idea that people could be talking about. Even if you're like not in favor of like new functionality, consensus cleanup is more like a bug fix, right? So it would be like trying to, if we talk about being low time preference and fixing bugs and making sure Bitcoin is robust and reliable and secure and decentralized and all the things that we normally say, then yeah, maybe we should be talking about consensus cleanup as an example. Or other people might be more interested in whatever covenant conversations or something else. Who knows? So yeah, and I think some of it is, I'm going to say, unnecessary friendly fire. I think I've seen a lot of people just kind of really getting angry, and kind of hurling a lot of insults. And of course, I'm not perfect in this. I'm hurling insults and receiving a lot of insults too. But I think some of it is unnecessary friendly fire, that people are kind of getting angry about things that are sort of outside. I think some of it is people are blaming, as an example, people are blaming core devs for what like spammers did, basically.
It is an interesting topic, but yeah, I do agree. It takes a lot of space on, and then I'm basically at fault here myself because I brought it up. so it's like I also
That's
do that.
okay.
But I think it's interesting because it just was such a huge debate. But I feel like it's not over, but the emotional component got less. Like people still talk about it, but it's less emotional. The first thing that every Bitcoiner does, and the most important activity that every Bitcoiner keeps on doing, is buying Bitcoin. And I personally use Relay to buy and sometimes also spend or sell my Bitcoin. And there are two main reasons why I do so. The first one is it's Bitcoin only. They do not do any shit coins. They do not do any cryptos, any stocks, or anything else. This is a tool, an app that is fully focused only and solely on Bitcoin. The second one is self-custody. They give you the keys to your Bitcoin the moment you buy them. You never give them the control over your Bitcoin, and you don't have to trust them because you can verify that you and only you have the keys to your Bitcoin. There's no third-party risk. There's no freezing of your assets. There's no rug pulling. There's nothing of that. Download Relay, the app, on your phone, or go to relay.app on your browser and use code Robin to save fees and get cheaper Bitcoin. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called micro seed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With micro seed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because MicroSeed is not selling the washer. MicroSeed is selling the device that stamps the washer. You get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today, and you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io.